Andy, welcome.
Thanks. Hey, how's it going?
It's going really well. I see you're at home.
Yeah, working from home today. Our the place where I work, they just moved offices like literally last Friday. So they're like, you can wait a couple days before you come back in. I'm like, great,
Oh,
cool.
that's awesome. Are
Yeah.
you like very pro work from home?
No, I actually like working from the office just because it's easier for me to separate the two. Like, I don't like seeing my work set up at home. Like that always like freaks me out a little bit because I'm like, should I be doing something? What's happening right now?
Oh,
Um,
that makes a lot of sense. Did you ever read that James Clear book, Atomic Habits?
I did. Yeah. 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 I did read that like about a year ago or so.
Oh, nice. I read it as well, and one of the sticking points from that book for me was the whole make sure your space is kind of conducive to what you're doing at that space and like keeping
Hmm.
things a little separate. So if it's your desk, he says, don't do things that aren't work at your desk. If it's your bed, don't do things that aren't sleeping in your bed. And so that's such a good point of like having an office set up at home. It's like, no, my home is my peaceful place.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. Like it's just like a weird thing because like my dog will be at my feet, like just kind of like, why are you here? I'm like, that's a good question. I don't know why I'm here right now, but I should be at work doing work and not at my kitchen table thinking about what I want to eat while I'm trying to work at the same time.
Yeah, it's like our brain can't adjust to be like, no, me work from kitchen table, not just eat.
Hmm. Yeah, exactly. Exactly. Do you work from home often or?
Not really, because I do when I'm not doing stand up, I'm a traveling notary. So
Oh,
people
okay.
will try to come here to get things notarized, and I'm like, no, no, this is not an office. I'll come to you. And I prefer it that way, but it's a lot of commuting. So I spend a lot of time in my car.
Yeah, that's understandable. That's good. That's good that you can do that. Like just be like, this is separate. When my wife during the pandemic was like working from home, and she still does it from like time to time, but she mostly works in her office as well. If we're both working from home on the same day, it's very hard for us to get work done. Just because I feel the need to go bother her a lot. Like I'll just be like, oh, okay, well, usually have something playing in the background, but because you're here. I'm just gonna go annoy you while you're trying to work right now. That's what's gonna happen.
It'd be so
So
hard to resist the temptation because it's like,
yeah,
no, I'm not going to be antisocial and ignore someone who's in my space, even though I'm supposed to be laser focused on work right now. You can't like just hit the off button on the human aspect.
exactly. Yeah, it's very hard, and she's very like diligent and focused whenever she's working. So me coming in and like kicking the back of her chair or whatever and saying like, "Hey, what's for lunch? What are we doing right now?" She's like, "I'm not like coworker. Come on, we got to figure out a lunch plan. Let's go." She's like, "It's 10 in the morning. Shut up. Go away." I'm like, "All right, fine."
Have you've been married a while, right?
Yeah, yeah. It'll be like 18 years in October, so that's pretty crazy.
Wow, congratulations. How did you meet your wife?
So it depends on who you ask. So the first time I met her, I was 16 and like her and her sister used to like produce like shows, like bands in Charleston, and I would go to those shows, and that's how I met her the first time. And I talked to them several times. She was like, "I don't remember any of that." I was like, "Your sister remembers. Why do you not remember? I don't understand this." She's like, "Probably because I was in college and you were in high school and I wasn't really like looking for high school dudes." I was like, "Maybe, but okay." So then we met a second time on there's a label out of Huntington Beach called Velvet Blue Music. And at the time I was living in South Carolina, but I liked some of the stuff they were putting out. And they also had like a message board that was mostly people from California just talking about different shows that they were going to and like what new bands were coming up. And I was just kind of following along with that. And then um, she randomly messaged me because she was like, "Oh, hey, you're from South Carolina. I'm from South Carolina. How are you?" We're like probably like I know we're like one of four people. We're like four. You're one of four people from South Carolina on this board. Everybody else is mostly from California. I was like, "Oh, hey, nice to meet you." And then like I was like, "Oh, wait, I know you." And she's like, "I don't remember you." I was like, "Okay, well, we've met several times. Sorry." But that's the second time we met. Yeah.
So I don't know a lot of people our age that have been married for that long. So do you have marriage advice? What's your top thing that, because I'm sure people ask you.
Yeah. I don't like I think like part of it is just allowing the being okay with the person changing and stuff like that. Like I know a lot of people like when they get married, they're like, we're gonna be the same people forever. And I'm like, oh, that's not probably going to happen. Like, I didn't start comedy until after I got married. That was something she had to kind of adjust to. She's changed in a lot of ways, like different like hobbies and things that she wants to do with her time. So it's like we're constantly adjusting to each other. The pandemic was actually like kind of hard for us a little bit at first because like she was so used to having her time to herself at home because I was out all the time that like one night, this is like maybe 2 months into the pandemic, like when we were like quarantined and everything, she just goes, hey, do you have somewhere to be tonight, like a show or a mic or something? Like, no. She's like, can you act like you do and just like leave for a few hours? I was like, where do you want me to go, man? Like, that's kind of mean. She's like, I'm sorry, I just can't. You're here all the time. I was like, I don't have anywhere else to be. I'm sorry. So like I think you have to have some kind of flexibility with the other person a lot of times because like they can change on you sometimes. You have to be like, oh, okay, cool. You're doing that now. I'll try to support you in some way, you know. So I think that's like a big thing for us, anyways. But also like for me with Hazel, like I wanted to be with her so badly. Like it was just like, yes, I got it. Like I win, you know, I succeed. You know, some people like I've known that been like, yeah, I mean, you know, I'm getting to be about that age, so I guess I got to start looking. I'm like, well, that's sad. Don't do that, please. If you don't want to be married, don't be married. Don't do it just because like it's age time or I want to have kids or whatever. I'm like, there's other ways to work around this.
Yeah, that's so true. It's you don't ever want your partner to feel like you've settled for them. I mean, how
Right.
crazy to be like, well, I'm 40, so I guess it's time now. And unfortunately, that is super prevalent, but it's nice to know there's really mindful people about it. And with your wife, you're like, no, I actually just genuinely want to be married to you and I want to grow with you. And whatever happens and however we like figure out new things. Oh, today I want this and tomorrow I want a little alone time. And you just have to be flexible, right? Like I'm sure you have
Yeah.
things that she has to tend to also and be like, well, he
Sure.
needs this, so I'm gonna give it to him.
Yeah. Yeah. She's great. And also I think it's like important to check in with the person like every once in a while. Like, we'll check in with each other every now and then. We're just like, hey, you doing okay? You cool? Like we're doing good. We're good, right? We she and I don't like people are like, oh, you guys cook dinner together? I'm like, no. Like usually we're cooking two separate things. For a while she was vegetarian, and then during the during the pandemic, like towards the end, she was like, I don't care about fish. I'm like, what? What are you talking about? She's like, I don't care about them. I don't care at all. I'm gonna get a fish sandwich right now. Can you go to McDonald's and give me a fish sandwich? I was like, I'm not holding you back. If you want to get a fish sandwich, I'll get you a fish sandwich, man. So it's just kind of funny, like just to be like, just like even that stuff. Because sometimes like I'll be like, oh, I'm getting her a nice treat. She's like, I don't do vegan food anymore. I'm like, oh, well, I'm sorry. Here, let me figure this one out. I should have asked earlier. So that was kind of fun. But yeah, like I think it's good to check in with the person that you're, you know, your partner or whatever. Just be like, hey, what are you doing? What are you thinking about? You got plans? You got goals? Anything I can help out with? All right, cool. Let's do that.
That's the important part. Just keep the lines of communication open because I think so many
Yeah.
people lose sight of that, and that's how like the resentment starts to fester.
Oh, big time. Yeah, for sure. I think that can really affect the relationship. Like I've seen people just like go for years without like talking to each other, and then they're like, "Well, we're getting a divorce." And like, I didn't. What? Like, can you at least like ask the person why you're getting divorced? They're like, "No, we're just getting it's time." I'm like, "Oh, okay." Again with the time thing.
Yeah. The time doesn't have to be a thing as long as you keep checking in with each other, like you said, and just have that. It's like people just grow apart, and then by the time they're getting divorced, it's like the actual impetus of the divorce started probably years ago when they stopped connecting.
Yeah, exactly. Totally.
Did you get
Cool.
this wise just from your upbringing, or are you in therapy? What do you do to like stay on top of being emotionally intelligent?
Um, I know like uh I we went to like a premarital counseling thing one time, and that like helped out too because they're like, hey, you gotta figure out who's doing what. Sometimes you can't be like, you're doing the cleaning, I'm doing the accounting for the two of us or whatever. Sometimes you gotta be like, hey, I don't like doing that. Can we switch or whatever? You know, like it's weird, but you do have to like occasionally talk to each other because you're not gonna read each other's minds. Also, like I read a lot of John Acuff. He's like a self-help guy or whatever. His stuff is mostly like projects. Like he does books like Finish, like which is just like getting things done, or like Start, which is like actually like instead of just thinking about the thing you want to do, is like actually starting the thing that you're saying you're gonna do or whatever. But he also has like a lot of like stuff about his marriage and stuff like that because I think he had like some marital issues earlier on. Like he said he like got fired like 8 times in a period of like 2 years, which I was like, that can't be easy on a
Wow.
marriage. So yeah, he had to like talk to his wife. I know at one point he like one time like threw up on his website. He was like, um, some book that he said that he was co-writing with his wife, and I was like, what? His wife's not a writer. That's weird. And then he took it down like a month later, and there was no word about it. But then like he like only in the last few months did he say he was like, yeah, so I did a dumb thing one time, and I was like, oh, you know who'd want to write a book with me? My wife, who has told me multiple times she does not like working with me. She just likes being married to me, and that's about it. He's like, but I was like, she'll want to write this book, and so I just threw it up on the website without asking her or even talking to my publisher about it. And then that led to a big fight. I was like, okay, note to self, don't do that kind of stuff. Sometimes people will be like, hey, does Hazel want to do comedy like on some weird like Valentine's theme show? I'm like, she does not ever want to do anything like that. Please do not ask her to do that.
Not every couple needs to work together. Some do, but it also depends so much on like the personality type. I
Yeah.
guess I'm more of an introvert than I like to admit. I always kind of thought I was like dead center and not really on one side of the fence, like extrovert or introvert. But then when I really contemplate like how I recharge, it's typically in solitude. And so
Mm-hmm.
even in my best relationships, even in my closest friendships and with people I like seemingly have no surface level, like really recognizable, tangible issues with, I still need time away from them because if I don't get that alone time to recharge, like I will just find things that are bothering me that actually don't really have real weight to them. It's just that I didn't get my needs met of like
Mm-hmm.
having space away from somebody. So I don't know how these couples can like start businesses together and come home and then run their families and their households together. It's like, don't you need a little bit of breathing room?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, our friends Julia and Nick, like they're married, they do comedy together, and I'm like, that's amazing. That's so fantastic. I'm so like it's so cool for me to see that. But like you and I were just talking about, like I'm kind of introverted too, and it's a very weird balancing act when you're doing stand-up comedy to be like, I'm an introvert, but it's like, well, you got to go out and meet a lot of people. You're like, okay. So like I'm always like taking naps and stuff like that just to be like, okay, I have to recharge somehow. So I'm gonna take a couple hours on the weekend just to sleep for a while, just so I can go back out to being out late and talking to a lot of people, which I do enjoy, but also is like not my strength in a lot of ways. It's just like I am so tired right now. Please leave me alone.
Yeah, same. It can be like while I'm so grateful for the community and it's so fun to go out and catch up with all these people, and it is mostly, I feel like everyone's my friend when I'm with them, but when I'm
Mhm.
back home, I'm like, oh, maybe they're a little bit more of an acquaintance, and that's okay too, because I wouldn't like call them or hang out with them outside of comedy. And so when you're around a lot of people that are kind of at that level of closeness to you, it can be a little exhausting because like maybe I don't feel fully comfortable being myself with them.
Yeah, yeah, totally. No, no, no. It's like, okay, how much small talk do I have in my back pocket right now? We've addressed the weather. I think I asked them if they saw anything good lately, and we both agreed that Borderlands sucks. That's all I've really got now. Okay, well, all right. And then like with comedy, it's like how deep can you really go? Because I feel like sometimes with stand-up comedy, it's not just the illusion of conversation; it's the illusion of appearing to go deep when you're not really going that deep at all. You're like, I was thinking about this the other day, and it's like you weren't really. You
Yeah.
considered it at best for a minute and then left it alone.
But it's a good conversation starter.
The good conversation starter, it really is.
Yeah. Do you have things that you do to make sure that your work-life balance is in check? Do you have certain priorities where you're like, oh, I haven't prioritized this thing that's part of my life or this thing that's part of work to like keep things feeling good?
Like for like my day job or comedy or
Yeah, everything. Because I think with
okay.
those of us who are in comedy who haven't gotten to a place where we can like leave our day jobs, it's almost like you have two full-time jobs
Hmm.
that you're trying to balance, but then you have your life too. You have your marriage and your friendships and family. Like, how do you prioritize?
Yeah, I so I guess like for me, like Hazel's gonna be like number one of all the priorities, just because I'm like I've told other like comics who just got married or whatever, and they're like, oh, I'm not hitting mics or shows as much since I just got married. I was like, you shouldn't be. Those shows will come and go. Hopefully your spouse will not. Hopefully they will
Mhm.
be with you forever. Please make sure to like make sure that's the strongest bond you have, because like that person's gonna be with you on your deathbed at best. Like chill, check in with them a lot. Um, but like I said, she's very okay with me not being around a lot. She's like, please leave, at least 2 or 3 times a week. That'd be great. Um, but like with comedy, like it just kind of depends on the week. I'm listening to a book right now called what is it called? It's called Tranquility by Tuesday.
Oh,
It's Laura Vanderkam. She's like big into like time management stuff. And so all of her books are about like just like balancing time and being like, okay, your spouse and you have kids and you have these projects, these hobbies that you want to do, but you also have a day job. And it's like, how do you balance these? And she just has all these like weird tips and studies that she's done on this stuff. And it's like very interesting. Like she's like, make sure you build in a couple extra hours throughout the week in case something falls through, and then you have those hours to fall back on and be like, okay, I've got this hour, so it's no big deal. Um, like there's other things like where it's just like, okay, like I like doing comedy a lot, so it's like obviously I'm gonna do shows and mics and stuff like that. And as a result, there's times where people are like, oh, have you checked out this new TV show, or have you seen this movie? And I'm like, probably not, no. Like, and it's weird because I want to write for TV, but it's like if you ask me, like I could tell you what the new shows are, but if you were like, do you remember this plot line? It's like it was probably playing in the background while I was writing or while I was doing something else for work. So I kind of vaguely recall that, that stuck out. But it's like there's certain things like you just have to give up. Like I was talking to my friend Drew Landry yesterday. It's very weird to see somebody who's very focused on something because you know that they've lost something else as a result of that. Like
hmm.
I know friends who are very good at like playing musical instruments but have very little social skills because they spent all their time in by themselves learning to play guitar or drums or something like that. And you're like, okay. I know comedians who are like, oh, you don't understand how paying rent works for some reason, but you know how to like you're very good at comedy. It's just when it comes to paying bills, you're like, wait, every month? I'm like, every month, dude. They're like, that's insane. I'm like, well, okay. If you say so, man. I don't know what to tell you.
Yeah, that whole starving artist lifestyle is not for me, and I think it gets romanticized a lot. There's that Bill Burr quote that everybody points to where they're like, "Oh yeah, well he was saying he was sleeping on a couch like well into his 30s and look how big he is now." And I kind of want to call bullshit that maybe there was a period where he crashed on a couch in between having his own apartments, but you can't be just I mean, let me see where I'm going with this because I also don't think that like you should really invest a lot into a plan B when you have a dream because then on a subconscious level, you're kind of telling yourself that the dream's not going to work out. So I
Right.
kind of think it might be like setting yourself up for failure ahead of time mentally. But I think you can do both, right? I think you can just be like so headstrong about your dreams and
Mm-hmm.
goals and prioritize it and be like, I'm doing stand up no matter what. But there are enough hours to also have your shit together and be an
Yeah.
adult. And you need to have the resources to have a life, right? Because if you're going to be an artist and you're going to get on stage in front of quote unquote regular people, they're not going to relate to the lifestyle of you couch surfing and not paying your bills just so you can be an artist. Like you have to go have regular life experiences. You have to travel, you have to pay bills and go to family events. Otherwise, you're just going to run out of things to talk about.
Yeah. I remember when I visited New York uh before moving to LA just to check it out and seeing so many like comics who were like, y'all ever have problems paying your cell phone bill? Or like my parents are paying for this right now, but I don't know, I'm still pretty poor. I'm like, okay, I can only hear so many comics in a row talk about being poor right now. Like this is not. I When I moved to LA, I remember there was like at least once a month I would see some comic get on stage like, I just moved here, I'm living on my car. Don't worry, I'll figure it out. And then I never saw that person again, like ever, like
They
since.
never
And I was
figured
like,
it
oh
out.
no, yeah. It's just like they figured out at best, hopefully, that they should move back and like just get some kind of support because you can't just be a starving artist all the time because like you said it's going to get old, you're not going to have anything to talk about, and also it's really going to play like weird stuff with your mind. It's going to make the dream poisonous in some ways because you're like I could have been okay with my life if I had just done good at comedy, but because I didn't, now I'm just in this horrible state right now. And it's like, oh, okay, you could have also just taken on a side job. Like you said, there's so many hours in the day. What are you doing during the day? There's not that many mics during the day. And the ones there are, it's like, this is weird, kind of. Whereas there's so many, most mics happen at night, most shows happen at night. It's okay to have a day job. You're not losing anything by having an apartment and not living with 10 other dudes, you know?
Yeah, it's the chaos just gets exhausting, and even
Mm-hmm.
watching people that are living in that kind of chaos is exhausting to me. And it's like you might find one or two people at an open mic that can maybe relate to you living in your car to follow your dreams. But the
Sure.
second you get on stage somewhere at the improv, like none of the audience members at the improv are living in their car, because then they don't have the money to buy tickets to a show and pay for the two
Right.
drink minimum. So you're automatically not going to relate to the majority of real audiences. And that's who you should be trying to cater to, not to open mic comics. And I think you and I both see that a lot, where people just start conforming their material to appease an open mic audience. And it's
Mm-hmm.
like, but what is your long-term goal? Is it to be in front of these people forever, or do you anticipate graduating and being in front of real paying audiences? Because like that's my goal.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. So I want to be in front of real paying audiences. And I feel like we we love the story of an outlier. Like, oh, look at this one person who did this thing. And like, yeah, one person did that thing. Not That's not the norm. Okay. Like there's other people out there you could look like. I was talking to, again, my friend Drew yesterday, and we were just talking about how like so many comics are like George Carlin, Richard Pryor. I was like, who else though?
Mhm.
Like who are some people you look up to that are just a couple levels ahead of you? Like look to those people, see what they're doing too. Like because that's where your the reality is for most of us is like two or three levels ahead of where we are. You might be a phenomenon that carries the game, but maybe have a plan C where you're not that, where you're not Dave Chappelle or whatever, or whoever's like the most famous comic in the world. Maybe you're just a comic who's like, I pay my bills doing comedy. I don't know that I'm a household name. I'm very popular in certain regions of the country. And Netflix gave me 12 minutes one time on a thing that nobody watched. So there's that. I think it's just weird that people really want to like tell you the story of like, oh, this Olympic athlete who has this weird like DNA about them that allows them to do certain things that most people can't do, and that's the person I'm gonna look up to. Honestly, I'm just gonna follow through with what they did. I'm like, you don't have that in your body. You don't have that ability. So what are some other things you could do to like maybe get to that level or around that level? Like it's always weird. Like when you're watching the Olympics, if you're like that person won a gold, I was like, dude, the person who won last is still like 50 seconds faster than I'll ever be in my entire life. That's insane. Come on. These people are all amazing, in their own way. It's crazy.
It's true. I saw, I think it was Amy Silverberg had like a funny tweet about it, where she was like, every Olympic event should have just a normal guy in it, so that
Mm-hmm.
we could all see what the event looks like if it's not an Olympic athlete, if it's just like maybe someone that goes to the gym and plays recreational tennis or whatever. Let's see how fast they swim, just so we can
Yeah.
really understand how fast even the person placing dead last at the swimming event swims.
Yes. Yes. So true. I remember one time when I was a kid, I saw this like weird show. It was like a kind of a reality show on Fox, but it was like um, professional athletes competing against animals in like random
I
sports.
already like it.
And one of them was like a sumo wrestler playing tug of war against like a chimpanzee, and the chimpanzee was not even trying. Like I don't think she was aware that something was happening. She was just holding the rope with one arm and eating food, and the sumo wrestler was trying his hardest to pull that rope, and he was not getting anywhere. And finally the monkey realized what was going on, just like pulled him across, no problem. And I was like, yeah, okay, yeah, there's no way. Like even at my best, I was like, I'll never be able to fight a chimpanzee, which has been my third dream. And I will let there was like track athletes, like Olympic athletes who ran track trying to outrun antelopes or whatever. And it's like, no, that's not gonna happen, man. Come on, so much faster. And like the announcer genuinely seemed surprised. He's like, in every category, the animal was the better of the two athletes. It was like, yeah, I bet they were.
But we have thumbs and can open doors, so I guess
Yeah,
we win in that way, right? Play to your strengths.
did they create an iPad? Because one of us did. So there's that.
I look at humans that way too, where I'm constantly trying to get perspective and be grateful that most people are not like me, because if everyone was like me, we wouldn't have demolition crews, we wouldn't have people that invent technology, we wouldn't have astronauts, we wouldn't have surgeons, because there's just things that I can't even wrap my mind around. I get like almost migraine level head pain when I try to think about either how small certain cells are or how big space is, because it makes me
Right?
feel so stupid.
It does. It's like, I don't know. It's so vast. It's like, I don't understand. Like, okay, one time I had a friend who moved here, and I could tell within like 3 weeks, I was like, he is not enjoying himself. And we had a talk one time, and he was like, dude, LA is so big. I was like, yeah, it's one of the biggest cities in the country. It's huge. He was like, and he just could not comprehend it. Like he just felt so small. Like, because he came from like we both did comedy in Charleston, South Carolina, which is a great scene, but it's much smaller. You're seeing a lot of the same people. Whereas in LA, like there are people I've met this year that have been doing comedy just as long as I have in LA, but I've never met them before in my life. And I was like, oh, hey, nice to see you. And that's just LA. Imagine how vast space is, or like how small cells are, and yet they're creating all this energy within our body. We're like, how? I don't even know. Like that's amazing, you know?
It's honestly mind blowing. So let's shift to comedy because you just put an album out. Is this your first album?
Yeah, it's my first album, so pretty excited
How'd you know
about
you
it.
were ready, or what made you want to record an album right now?
I think like so I grew up on like Comedy Central, and I was just like, oh, they're gonna, like eventually I'll get good enough, and then somebody will be like, oh, Andy's good enough, and then he can go do this thing. And then you get in LA long enough, and you're like, oh, that's not how this works anymore, at least. Like it's just like, oh, you can do stuff on your own. You don't have to wait for somebody to tell you you're ready. You can just go do that thing. I was like, oh, okay. And then I think I had a couple friends who put out their own albums, and I saw that, and I was like, oh, and then they put out their own specials, and I was like, oh, okay, yeah, I guess I'm ready to stop waiting, because I've seen plenty of people who did the thing that I want to do, and they're still like maybe not at the same level as me or whatever, but they're like just one or two levels ahead of me. They themselves are not household names. Like, oh, this is not. There's not necessarily stepping stones up a path. It's kind of like a weird up and down graph on a map kind of thing. So you just do whatever you want to do. And I was like, well, I've always wanted to put out an album, and I think I have enough material to put out an album, so I'll try to do that. And I think also I was talking to a potential manager, and they were like, hey, I'd like to see you do an hour. And I was like, oh, okay. And so I started putting all the pieces together, be like, what would the hour look like, kind of. And then I had it. And I was like, okay, this is great. And then I was like, I'll try to. I knew people that recorded at the clubhouse, and so I was like, I'll just do that because that's pretty cheap. And I knew friends who would like tape it for really cheap too, and that like were good at what they did. So I was like, can you guys tape me? And they're like, sure. And so I got it all set up for like around March, and I was like, okay, it's gonna be a free event. I think it only cost me like maybe $150,
That's
maybe.
it? Wow, I was
Yeah,
expecting it to be in the thousands.
no, 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 no. Because like the special, like it was gonna be like there was three cameras. One of them stopped like 10 minutes into the set, and I wasn't aware of it. And I was like, oh, well, there's not gonna be a special now because I can't have two random side views of me just
Right.
going back and forth. But I still liked the recording; it came out really well. And I was always like fan of like Brandy, who runs Burn This Records, and my friend Andy Erickson like introduced me to her and was like, "Hey, my friend Andy recorded this and would like to maybe put it out through your label. Would you be interested?" But Brandy liked my recording and was like, "Okay, yeah, I'll put this out." I was like, "Great, thank you." And it was like such a fast process too, because I think I contacted her in May, and she was like, "Okay, yeah, this sounds good. We're gonna get it edited a little bit, but we're gonna put it out in August. Is that good?" I was like, yes. Like again, it's that thing of like you always think you're gonna be prepared and ready for when something happens, and then you're like, should I wait another year and then I'll feel ready? It's like, no, you're just gonna have to do it. It's like, okay, well, all right. And then like we just started working on it together, and like it came out in August, so it's like really cool that worked out. But it was just like such a fast process. I was fully expecting to be like, oh, it's gonna be like December maybe. I'm like, okay, but quick turnaround. Very good. Very happy with it.
That is fast. And did you do like a release party or what's been your method for getting it out to people?
Oh yeah, there was like no release party because I get very stressed when I have to like organize a party of any sort. I'm like, what? They're like, yeah, like get a bunch of people together. I was like, I do not want to do that at all. And then people were going to constantly come up to me and be like, hey, how do you feel about your album? And I'm like, I feel good. I feel good. I probably would have done something that would have like annoyed somebody, but like gotten up at the beginning and was like, hey, just to answer all your questions up top so we don't do this anymore. It's like feeling good about the album. It was great. Thank you for enjoying this. And then we can go back to normal conversations for the rest of this party and not talk to me about this ever again. Um, like just because it's weird to have like a barrage of people come up to you and ask you like your album, you feeling good? I was like, I feel really good sometimes about it. Other times not so good, but most of the time feeling pretty good about it. Like I like sometimes I'm always like in my head about things because I'm like, I genuinely like this. And then in my head, I'm like, do other people like this? I'm like, I hope they do. I think they do. And other people told me that like I really like that album. I'm like, great. I'm so happy for you then. That's fantastic. Nobody said any bad things about it to me. So that's all awesome. That's all I really want. I was like, nobody said anything bad. And then getting that Write Up and Paste magazine was like a big thing for me. I was like, oh, that's so cool. That Paste magazine was like, hey, yeah, we really like this album too. I'm like, great, because I like your magazine and I like the artist that you cover. So this is awesome. Brandy was like, we're gonna have to promote a lot. And I'm not like a big social media guy. So like it's like, okay. So like every day I had to find a different way to like say something about the album. And that always felt like weird too, because it's weird going from like maybe posting once a week on social media to posting every day on social media for like 2 weeks. But it really seemed to work out and people were really supportive. So that really helped out a lot. Have
Is
you ever
there a
done an album
reason?
or anything?
Sorry, what was that?
Sorry, have you ever done an album?
I haven't done an album. It was something I was thinking about when I was like starting to plan my 2024. I thought, oh, I would love to record, even if it's just like a mini special, like a half hour towards
Yeah.
the end of the year. But I think I've gotten really intimidated by like what it might cost to do that, of like, what venue am I going to rent out?
Mm,
Who am I going to hire? Like, I don't necessarily have hookups for cameras and things like that. So I was toying with the idea of maybe doing like a co-headlining special, find somebody else who's ready to do a half hour and go in with them cost wise. And then
sure.
to be honest with you, it's still something I really want to do, but I've just dropped the ball on actually making it happen. So it's not looking like it's in the cards for me for 2024, but maybe I'll try again next year because I am definitely like really ready to retire some of my material. I think some of it that I love a lot isn't evergreen enough to like make it past this year, next year. So I'm also like, as I sit down and I try to map out what material would even go into that hour, I'm like, maybe I thought I had an hour, maybe I don't, because a lot of this stuff I'm like not even doing at shows.
Yeah. Well, that's kind of the fun thing about when you do the hours. Like you now you have to start doing that material. Like I went to Nashville for a week, just to like I hadn't been in the South in a while, and I wanted to like make sure my material like worked like everywhere, not just in LA or whatever. So like it was kind of a fun test of like, oh, now I have to do material I like a lot. I just don't do it as much because like it's hard to get it in a 10-minute chunk. It's like, okay, how do I get to that point? So that's kind of the fun thing about preparing for the album is like you get to do your material that you like, but you just haven't had a chance to do it in a while. Finding ways to do it. But I mean, you still have like 5 months left in the year, I think. So, I mean, you could still do it, man.
I could, you're right. Yeah, I might think about it maybe in September. And if I do it, it would be like really, truly like pushing it to December, or I could just plan it for like January, February or something. I feel like I've
Yeah.
struggled. I don't know if it's the scene that's changed or if it's just me maybe being like a little bit stubborn and not leaving like my area of LA to do mics and stuff, but I feel like I just haven't been getting like as much stage time either.
Hmm.
So without like going out of my way to set up shows in other cities, which is what I would need to do to get
Yeah,
ready for any kind of recording. I'm just like, oh, I'm definitely not ready with how much stage time I've been doing. The time that I've been getting, I've been using to like work on new material.
sure. No, I understand that. That's part of the reason I did the Nashville trip too. Is like I was getting stage time, but I was like, I want to get like a lot of stage time in one go, and this is the best way to go about it. Are there any cities that you'd really like to do like do your material in?
I'm really lucky in that whenever I go home to Ohio, the Cleveland comedy scene is like super, super welcoming. And when I'm in town, not only are they like, do you want to do those shows? They kind of just go, what shows do you want to do? Just let us know and you're on them. And it's like that is not I get like the red carpet treatment over there. It's amazing. And I don't
So,
get that here. And even here, I'm like, oh, I love going to San Diego. I feel like I do really well with San Diego audiences. And then I go and try to get stage time and like even go to
mhm,
Arizona, go to like Nevada, wherever, like things that are logistically really easy for me. But just hasn't, I don't want to say it hasn't fully panned out because it's also me taking accountability and being like, oh, I don't reach out and try to schedule things out of state either.
sure, sure. Yeah, it could be hard sometimes. Like I have some friends in Seattle, and that's how I was able to get on some shows in Seattle. And so like it's like, oh yeah, Seattle, I'll just do that. And like I did a festival in Wisconsin recently, and so that like allowed me to meet a lot of people from Chicago who thankfully I, was able to impress enough that they were like, hey, if you ever come to Chicago, let us know. I'm like, oh, okay, cool. Yeah, I'll definitely hit you up. But it's like, I don't know, it's such a I remember like not Ron Babcock, Emo Phillips one time, he was giving advice to Maria Bamford because she was like, how do you get a following? And he was just like, oh, you go to a city and you do comedy and then maybe one or two people like you and then you go to another city and then you come back to that original city you started out in, and those two people who liked you, they bring more people, and then you just keep doing that for years, and then eventually you have a following and you have people who are like, oh, I like this person a lot, this is great. But which is like great, but also it's like, oh, it sounds like so much work to do, and it's so hard to like get to shows sometimes, and you're just like yeah, three people showed up, you're like, okay, I'm glad I took time off work to come to this city to do this. This is nice. And as long as those people like you, I guess it's worth it. But at the same time, it feels like, oh, this would been so much better if there'd been more people to enjoy me.
Of course, it's really like intimidating to do that. Is there a reason you're like resistant to social media? Because that seems to be not that I'm like a case study for
Yeah,
success on social media. I'm definitely not, but is there a reason you don't like participating?
I get very in my head about things because I'm just like did I say this already? Is this a repeat? And then like the things that I come up with to put on social media are usually like like things just for myself, not like promoting shows or whatever, like just things for me, are very complicated. Like it's like doing Excel videos like are fun to me, but it takes me like an hour or two to actually like put them together, and it's time I'd always rather be like, I'd rather go do a mic or a show right now than like try to like make sure I taped this correctly and do 15 takes in a row of me just being like, and that's how you do a VLOOKUP, right? So that kind of stuff. But I'm actually I scheduled a meeting with a person who does a lot of social media to like help me figure out a better, quicker way to go about it. So I'm doing a one-on-one session. So I am, fingers crossed, I'm going to get better at it. Or social media won't be as important anymore. And then I'll be like, thank God. Patton Oswalt was in some interview or last week, I think, where he was like, yeah, a lot of the newer comics coming up are like not posting to social media. I'm like, oh, really? Can I hang out with them? Are they cool? I would like to do that. That sounds way better than
Oh,
me
that
just like,
sounds, I like that it goes the against the grain of what I've been assuming has been happening just from like what I've been seeing is that, oh, well, social media following results in ticket sales, results in being able to tour, which is like the thing that I want to do. But if it
yeah,
opens again, like opportunities open again to be able to do that without it, that would be so cool because a lot of times it feels like being on a hamster wheel. It's like you can post something and it can do well, and the next day it doesn't matter, and you need to try to hit it again.
yeah. It's such a weird thing because I know like three comics who they were already great comics to begin with, and then their social media blew up, so they were able to like tour and do that like full time. But then I also know comics that I think are very funny, and they have like huge social media numbers. But I also know for a fact that their social media numbers mean nothing regarding their audience showing up to see them live. And I'm like, why is that? I don't understand. Like that you have a million followers, but none of those millions of people wanted to come see you perform at the Improv, or they didn't want to see you perform even at like a local club for like free. There's like, no, I just like seeing you comment on people's videos or whatever. You're like, oh,
Yeah.
okay.
It's counterintuitive. Do you have like a writing process for joke writing? Do you like sit down to do it?
Yeah, yeah. So this is, I mean, I still do this now. I think my brain has gotten trained enough that it can kind of do it on its own, but I feel like I still do this process, which is like I find something that interests me, like not necessarily. I guess you could do it with a news topic, but I don't really do news stuff just because it's not evergreen. You have to stop doing it at some point. But it's like, oh, my wife is very into like skulls or whatever, and then like that's something she's genuinely interested in. Like she thinks that's a cool like just thing for decoration purposes, for art. She has a skull tattoo on her arm now, all this stuff. And so, like me just sitting down and be like, I'm gonna write 50 jokes about this one thing in one sitting. I can't get up. I have to stay here. And I think that forces your brain to like kind of like warp because like you'll like the first 10 jokes, you're like, yeah, that was easy. And then when you get to like 15 or 16, you're like, okay, I think I've said all there is to say about this. And then you start finding different ways to say things. You're like, oh, that's a weird way of looking at it. Okay, that's, yeah, I'll say that. And then sometimes you loop into something else and then you come back to the skull thing. You're like, that's fun. And then at the end of the day, you have 50 jokes, and maybe one of them will be used in your stand up set. And the rest of them will just be like, well, that was fun. But maybe you'll come back to it later on. You're like, oh, there it is. That's the way I'll say that. And then it'll be great. But that's usually my process. Like, what do you do for yours?
That's first of all, that's really disciplined. So I like that a lot. In theory, I've thought, oh, just write 20, not 50 jokes
Yeah.
about something, but getting to it, I definitely have a process. And going back to what I was saying about like James Clear earlier, where I think I was accidentally doing it even before I read Atomic Habits, where I like
Mhm.
have a space that I like to go to. And it used to be a specific Barnes and Noble that I was living near. And now it's turned into just like a coffee shop in my area because I feel like
Mhm.
I need to have all my senses in alignment in order to I need to like hear a certain type of playlist. I need to smell an environment. And for the longest time, it was like what the Barnes and Noble smelled like. And now it's just what the coffee shop smelled like. And then I handwrite in a journal still. So I'll sit down and I'll
Oh,
look
wow.
at premises that I've jotted down, either on my phone or in the notebook. And then I try to like expand on those, or I go back to jokes that kind of haven't been working as well as I'd like them to. And I try to just rewrite them to death. And sometimes I'm able to figure them out and sometimes I'm not. But my little breakthroughs really come from those sessions of like sitting down and just meticulously rewriting jokes that I already have.
Yeah. That's pretty cool, man. Like, do you, I heard this one time on Jackie Cation and Lori Kilmartin's podcast. Do you keep your old journals or do you throw them away?
I keep them, but I almost never look at them because
Yeah.
I think whenever I do write, it makes sense to me as I'm writing it, but it's kind of disorganized. So if I look at an old notebook, it's a lot of set lists. So it's a lot
Hmm.
of like a couple words, and then I'm like, where's the rest of the joke? I don't remember what the rest of the joke was.
Yeah.
Not very helpful.
No, no. I used to have like 10 or 12 notebooks that I'd filled out over time and I just like threw all of them away before I moved here because I was like, I've reread these like two or three times each. There's nothing, I'm not gonna find anything new in them. And like you said, some of them are like literally just two words. I'm like, I don't know what that means. I'm just gonna guess this was since I didn't write it down twice, that means I probably didn't do it ever again after this night. So I just threw it away. Um, and I think, and the thing is too that like some people are like, oh, you'll lose those jokes forever, and it's like, no, I still have them occasionally pop back in my head. I'm like, oh yeah, that thing. I forgot I even said that. What does that mean? Oh yeah, okay, there's the punchline. Okay, yeah, maybe I'll try it again, and then I try it again, and it's worthless. I'm like, ah, oh, you screwed me again, brain. Why'd you do this?
I try to have it's not like a hard and fast rule, but if I try a joke usually three times, that kind of covers my basis for
Yeah,
if it's the room at all, if it's the audience at all. Like if it doesn't work three consecutive times, it doesn't work.
yeah, no, totally. That's totally right. And like again, that joke might come back, and then you figure out the placement of it 2 years later. You're like, oh, there's the word that I meant to say. That works way better for some reason.
And that's an
Um,
argument for keeping not necessarily old journals because it'll take me so long to get through even just one journal where I'll like go back to the beginning of it and there was something I started to write and maybe a year later I can finally figure that out. Or all of a sudden, like an old joke from 3 years ago will all of a sudden make sense as like a tag to a new joke.
mhm. Yeah, exactly. You're like, oh, because you had time and experience to, again, live a more fulfilling life. And then you're like, oh, there's more aspects to this I didn't think of that would be more interesting to people. Um, like, I think I have a lot of jokes about not having kids and not really wanting to have kids. But if I had said them when I was first starting out in comedy, when I was like 27 or whatever, nobody would have taken me seriously. They're like, well, yeah, you're 27. You don't know what you're talking about. It doesn't matter, you know? But now that I'm like a little bit older, people are like, oh, yeah, you're just okay. Yeah, you're just gonna stick with this. Okay, that's cool. Like I understand you better. It is weird that some audiences won't accept certain premises depending on your age as a comic. Like if you're like, I've got these thoughts, you're like, I'm sure you do.
That's so true. And I also think audiences, there's a lot of wisdom in what they do and don't respond positively to, because
Mm-hmm.
I've seen a great deal of comedians going up there with premises that I know are not true to that comedian because I know that comedian outside of them being on
Yeah.
stage. And they'll talk about, let's say, for example, being really broke. And it's like, I know the person's and I know they're not broke and I know they're
Right.
doing really well. And
Right.
I think that like even the audience somehow feels the inauthenticity that's behind what they're saying. It's like if it's bullshit, you feel it, you feel your
Oh,
own
sure.
bullshit. And so the audience picks up on you feeling it. And that's why it's like you gotta set it down and walk away from things that are untrue. Like there's something to be said for being sarcastic or like exaggerating, but deep down, if
Mm-hmm.
a premise is just not true, like the audience is gonna feel that.
Oh, 100%. Yeah. I remember there's a comic I was friends with, and he started to do material about like smoking weed, which I knew he didn't do at all. And it never went well. And then he was actually on Kill Tony and he did that joke and he got called out like immediately by the staff, which I felt awful for him. I was like, this is so embarrassing right now. But they were just like, do you actually smoke weed? And he was like, no. And they're like, why are you bringing this up? Why are you even talking about it? He's like, they're like, are you trying to like fit in or like, is it trying to hang out with the cool kids or whatever? He's like, I don't just this like I think he'd seen other people succeed with that material. And I was like, if that's not true to you, don't do it. Like it's not necessary.
Yeah, that's so true. So outside of this could be something in comedy or in life. What is the
Okay.
last thing you complained about?
Last thing I complained about in comedy. Um, Sometimes you do things for the community. It's not just for you. Like maybe you run a mic for a little bit. You don't have to run it forever. But I've run like a couple mics and I've run like uh 3 shows, I think, since I started doing comedy, like 3 different shows over time, or 4 shows actually, but like over time. And like it's totally a hassle at times. And it's fun in some ways, but it can be very stressful at times. And also like you're like, okay, I kind of just want to be a comedian and just do jokes. But also sometimes you're like, hey, this is good. I'm providing this for people. But there's a weird thing I've noticed with some of the slotted mics is they create their own communities within those slotted mics. And then the people at the slotted mics don't really go anywhere else. They just stay there at the slotted mics. They're like, I'll just be at this place all day. And then as a result, they really do build a community, but at the same time, like they don't know that there's other comedians out there, and they're just like trying to like you said, cater to each other as far as being a comedian goes. And also at the same time, like, hey, maybe do a mic somewhere else. Maybe you could host a mic. They're like, nah, that's not really my thing or whatever. Or like maybe you could like there needs to be more shows and mics in LA in general, I feel like. And it's just like I feel like nobody's really stepping up because they're just like such a hassle. I'm like, I know it is, right? It is such a pain in the butt, but it really does pay off in some ways. And I think the community really can't just thrive on like the 20 indie shows and then the clubs. Like that can't be it. Like there's got to be more to it than just that. And so that I was just complaining to a friend about that because like before the pandemic, there were so many shows. I felt like and so many different things and so many different mics, and so you could go do like 3 or 4 mics in a night and meet so many different people. And now it's like the only way you could do that is if you just hang out at that one slotted mic all night long. and you just get more and more depressed as the evening progresses because you're like, I'm just around these same guys or these same girls. I'm just like here all the time, and I hate this so much. I want to go out and be in front of different people because, like you said, you can't just try the same. Like you said, try the same joke 3 times, but you can't try it in front of the same people. You have to go find other people to be like, what's your perspective on this? Do you like this? Do you not like this? So it's such a weird thing. I guess just complaining about the lack of expansion in comedy in LA is really what it was.
It's true. I'm glad you spoke on that because I've definitely been feeling it too. And I think maybe just our class of comedians knew that or felt that, or maybe we just didn't have as much, like maybe we weren't as nervous and as isolated as like the younger generation. And I know I'm like really making a blanket statement here, but I feel like
Yeah.
because so much of their existence is online and just really invested in what's going on with my online presence, that they're not like
Mhm.
expanding and seeing the value of having a lot of different rooms, but there is so much value in, hey, just try to run a show, just try to run a mic so you can understand what it's like to be on the other end of it. Because producing shows taught me so much about how to treat other producers, how to treat hosts and comedians that you're booking, and how to treat bookers. Like, there's just a lot of wisdom in being on the other side of an industry that you want to be a part of. So if anybody's listening that's a younger comic, like please start a room, even if you hate it, like you're doing a
Yeah.
service to the community, and there's a lot of growth that comes from that, like externally and internally. And it's such a good way to meet people. Like, oh, all these comedians that I was a huge fan of when I was like 1 year in, 2 years in, I got to meet them and work with them because I would book them on shows and they were
Yeah.
grateful to have stage time, so they'd come do it.
Yeah. It's such a cool thing to be able to like work with people that you're like, I looked up to this person, now they're on my show. Um, and then also like again, you don't have to do it forever. Like whenever I did the 2 mics I hosted in LA, both times I told my co-producer, I was like, I'm going to do this for a year and then I'm not going to do it anymore. And they were like, oh, really? I'm like, it's a lot. It's a lot of work. I totally agree with anybody who's ever been like, it's a lot of work. I'm like, I am in complete agreement, which is why I only did it for a year. Cause I'm like, okay, that's enough of that. I'm tired now and I'm not going to do this anymore.
Yeah, it doesn't have to be forever. And I
No.
know I have to let you go. So,
Yeah.
Andy Ryder, thank you so much for doing the show. Tell people where they can find you and your album.
You can find my album on Bandcamp, iTunes, Apple Music, which is iTunes, I guess now, and then Amazon, Spotify. It's Andy Ryder, and the name of the album is The Get Together. And you can also find me on Instagram at Andy Ryder again. I don't post very often, once a week again. Trying to get better about it. We'll see.
Awesome. Thank you so much. And thank you everybody for listening. Bye.
Thanks, Galina.